We'll intervene whenever we decide it's in our national security interest to intervene. And if you don't like it, lump it.
The problem with America is not that we go around marauding around the world imposing ourselves. The problem with America in the last 10, 15 years since the end of the Cold War, really in the last 60 years, is that we've been too slow to get involved.
I don't know how many Iraqi civilians were killed, but I can assure you that the number is the absolute minimal that it's possible in modern warfare.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
You know, that land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
Welcome to the darkened hour.
Hi everyone, today Adam and I are joined by journalist Sander Hicks. Sander is the author of 2 books on 9/11, The Big Wedding and Slingshot to the Juggernaut. And in these he brings out a lot of unique aspects which we really hadn't encountered anyone else talking about. And this includes the highly suspicious death of a whistleblower, Dr. David Graham, who reported 2 of the hijackers to the FBI prior to 9/11 happening. Another whistleblower named Richard Taus, who has information on the FBI's Carson Dunbar, a key figure in the 1993 Trade Center bombing, as well as Mohamed Atta and his CIA-connected friends down in Florida. We also talk about the direction of the 9/11 truth movement in general, and that's where we'll jump in.
But I applaud what you're doing because it seems like you're interested more in deep state machinations and a corruption that's going, that whether or not you're a 9/11 truth aficionado, there's a corruption there that exists in the U.S. capitalist imperialist state that is worth exposing.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing. I think 9/11 is a portal through which you can come to understand the wider world. You know,
yeah,
maybe going back 100 years in history and certainly up to today. So in looking at what's going on in the Straits of Hormuz right now with the oil tankers that are getting hit.
I was going to point that out.
It's
never been more relevant, actually. I was thinking that I should maybe back away from some of the 9/11 truth stuff that I've done because I'm in the DSA now, and it's not. I don't know. I hate to cave to peer pressure because I never have in all of my life. But at age 48, I'm trying to be more of a good partisan activist for affordable housing, and I'm trying to branch out a little bit and not be just siloed in one issue. But then you can just see a clear use of flimsy, fabricated evidence. Pompeo saying, "We have evidence it was the Iranians who attacked the Japanese oil tankers, but we can't tell you." You know, it's like the time that Christopher Hitchens was arrested in an Iron Curtain country, and they said he kept on saying, "I won't say it's Kafkaesque," but until finally they said, "We do know the reason you were arrested, but we can't tell you." So that's the moment he said it's certainly Kafkaesque.
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about the Iranian situation there a moment ago, and I do take some heart in that what I'm seeing, and it might be that I exist in my little bubble, but I'm seeing a lot of people going, "Oh yeah, pull the other one," you know, which I don't think was around 20 years ago. And I do think whatever, even if it's been a rough ride with things like 9/11 and a lot of, say, a wide spectrum of belief it's generated from the kind of conspiracy paranoia to the more sane and understandable.
Yes, and these things are measurable. You could actually look at the use of false flag as a military term that has gained mainstream acceptance. And this is not just a theory or speculation. There's actually, you could measure it, that's quantifiable. You could say how many times in the media has the term false flag been used, or does the OED, Oxford English Dictionary, at what point was that term used? Because if you just use that term, that you've reached a level of, inherent skepticism and inherent historicity of Gulf of Tonkin, Battleship Maine, the Kuwaiti incubator scandal, and all of these provocations, that were clearly fabricated for the cause of imperialism.
Yeah, and I think that's got to be objectively a good thing, right? Even if there are people who say the towers were holograms and no one died on 9/11, and I see their posts on Facebook, even if you got that going on, and it's a very mixed bag, that people are more aware of false flags, that the term is used more, that has to be objectively a good thing, right?
It is, yeah. And that, and so, yeah, I guess you and I are very similar because I think we're very analytical, and it's easy to judge, you know, but it's my Zen training teaches me to like try to take a step back from that judging mind. You know, it's not good or bad, you know. And so there's something really, you know, sure, the 9/11 truth movement is messy, and sure, people get distracted and they bark up the wrong tree, or what we think is the wrong tree. But I'll tell you this, you know, like 10 or 15 years ago, I thought controlled demolition was the wrong tree to bark up. You know, I took a swipe at it in the Big Wedding once or twice. But now I think Richard Gage and AE 9/11 Truth have more or less the right thesis that two planes cannot be the sole cause of the takedown of 3 towers. You know, Building 7 is not explained. And so therefore, you know, and then looking at the physical evidence, et cetera, the way that the buildings came down, it seems that is a strong way to get into other geopolitical issues around 9/11.
My question for you would be, do you think that's the obvious entry into 9/11? Because I myself,
no.
What would be the obvious entry?
This is something I'm really concerned about. And when I ran for Congress, it's almost like a poll. You know, it's almost like I figured out the way to approach a mainstream progressive Democrat who's not in favor of 9/11 truth. If you simply say, yeah, but don't you think there's something suspicious about the Saudi financial connection? 15 of 19 hijackers were Saudi. And what about that Michael Moore stuff in his film about the Saudis being flown out? Isn't the fact that the Saudis were flown out that day really suspicious? So even if somebody's really anti 9/11 truth, you can get them to kind of, it's your foot in the door if you mention the Saudi financial connection, especially in the wake of all these breakthroughs in the 28 pages.
Right, but I think another problem is that there's a seemingly, in my opinion, from what I've experienced online, there's a decent percentage of people within the truth movement who are seemingly or anti-Semitic almost to a point. Is that something that worries you, by the way?
Yeah, it does. It does worry me. I mean, this is where my membership and lifelong commitment to liberation and being somebody who's trying to stand up for the rights of all oppressed peoples, you know, gets offended. Like I've personally confronted Christopher Bolin about some stuff that was in the first draft of his book. It's not there now, but he was, you know, his book has some good stuff in it, but he shoots himself in the foot by saying stuff like, oh, and the Jews control all the media and they control all of pornography, you know? So that's like, you've prevented yourself from saying anything intelligent about Israel and geopolitics if you indulge in the same old anti-Semitic, you know, Jew-hating conspiracy theories. And it's a problem the Iranians have too. You know, I've been to these conferences, and they've also had dalliances at these conferences with some Holocaust deniers, and so it kind of taints the entire conference. So yeah, so that is something. However, I'll say this too. Israel was up to its neck, deeply connected to the 9/11 event.
Sure.
You know, the 5, and this is something that you're going to hear more about in the next couple of years from the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. So it's not like I'm out on a limb. I'm not alone. It's not just me and Christopher Bolin, thank God, who are saying this. It's the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. I know personally is very interested in helping to expose in a court of law the 5 dancing Israelis who celebrated the attacks with cigarette lighters and high fives, and then were later arrested by East Rutherford police, and then were later detained by the FBI. It became a counterintelligence operation. There's a document, you guys, since you guys like to read and dig deep, there's a document called the Shea Memo. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I posted it on my Facebook page, actually.
Oh, good. And then maybe I already know. Maybe, yeah, okay, good.
Adam's the kind of serious researcher. Adam's the brains of the operation, really. I just turn up and ask questions, you know.
I can't believe I never even heard about it until just last year, or a year and a half ago. But on the road in Dallas, one of the lawyers committee for 9/11 inquiry people turned me on to it. So for those listeners of yours who might not know, the Shea Memo is worth looking at online. It was a document written by an international attorney who was so concerned about the Israeli connection to 9/11 that he took it upon himself to write and send out to every single member of Congress a copy of this memo. And there was going to be an article about it, I think, at one point for Salon.com, and then it got killed at the last minute. So Counterpunch did something. So there is something online from Counterpunch. And it's worth looking into because it carefully and legally dissects the Israeli connections to 9/11. And there was a DEA infiltration by Israeli intelligence in June of 2001 that I had no idea about. It reminds me actually of the Richard Taus stuff, because Richard Taus also was interested in DEA corruption. If you've been reading up on Taus, so I'm sure we'll talk about it later in the show. But because Taus left the New York FBI and then no, I'm sorry. I'm thinking about Brad Ayers. Sorry, I'm confusing my FBI whistleblowers. Anyway, sorry. So back to the main thread. So the Shea Memo exposes the Israeli connection. So every time Trump talks about Palestinians celebrating the attacks, intelligent people should say, no, there actually is a media trail and a police arrest record of Mossad agents. And this is what's great about the Shea Memo, is that this guy had some sort of access to some kind of national intelligence database, and he was able to say that it was verified that at least 2 of those 5 dancing Israelis were actual agents of Mossad.
Yes, that was the brothers, Paul and Steve von Kurtzberg.
Right, the Kurtzberg brothers, exactly. Yeah. And they were later on Israeli television, and they said that they were there to document the event, so they indicated foreknowledge. So it's rare to talk to 2 guys who have actually read both of my books, so I appreciate that. You can also see the evolution of my strategy. At first, in 2005, I was thinking that the best way to expose the obvious lies about 9/11 was just to talk to the whistleblowers who are trying to stop it from happening. Look at the foreknowledge, right? So Delmar Vreeland, who had some ostensible ties to Navy intelligence, and Randy Glass, who was a FBI whistleblower, Joint Terrorism Task Force, Operation Diamondback, and people like that. Richard Taus to a certain extent too, because Richard Taus was in Clinton Correctional Facility and was actually interviewed by FBI right after 9/11, because one of the people he was in prison with knew Mohamed Atta personally. Do you know that?
Yes, it was in your book. It's in the second book.
Oh.
I forget the fellow's name, but yeah, I do recall that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's in fact, there's that memo that Richard Taus wrote, and I put it in toto as an appendix in the book. So that's right. Yeah. So that was interesting. And then of course, 6 years later, 2011, I had my own kind of a deeper sense of revelations about 9/11, with confronting the FBI about the murder of Dr. David Graham. And that really it helped me take the gloves off, like scales fell from my eyes, and I was able to see 9/11 in a deeper way. And instead of saying, well, maybe the Bush administration let it happen, I kind of saw that it was the U.S. military-industrial complex, the intelligence complex, that didn't just let it happen, but caused it to happen. They were shepherding Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar, right? These are the guys that are mentioned many times in the 28 pages. Joe Trento says that they were agents of Saudi intelligence in his book On Safe at Any Altitude. And he's an interesting guy with all kinds of connections. He did, you know, he interviewed James Jesus Angleton on his deathbed and has a unique perspective on the CIA. And so Trento's book is backed up by people like Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer, who said that he was also aware of Mohamed Atta and Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar in early 2001 with Able Danger, and then somehow top brass at the Pentagon put the kibosh on Able Danger. So those names keep on coming up. Nawaf al-Hazmi, Khalid al-Mihdhar, you know, who lived with an FBI informant before 9/11? Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar, right? So who was getting money from Princess Haifa, right? Like all this wire transfers from Prince Bandar and Princess Haifa, the Saudi royal family. It was Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar. And so the reason that the scales fell from my eyes is because somebody, after I published a piece on Alternet about some of this stuff, somebody sent me this unpublished manuscript by, again, another whistleblower, Dr. David Graham, who was effectively murdered by the FBI in Shreveport, Louisiana, right around 2004, 2005. He just wouldn't shut up and wouldn't, he felt he had kind of almost like a Christian mission, like this was the cross that he wanted to bear and to carry and to try to save the country from the next 9/11 or something like that. And instead, he was killed. He was killed. And I think the thing that he was really exposing was Barksdale Air Force Base, like a direct military connection to the 19 hijackers and their handlers and who knows what else? Who knows what other kinds of middlemen and men in black, or, you know, three-letter agencies.
Just to pick up on that then, with Dr. David Graham, it's really real. Adam and I recently recorded on the goings on at Alex Station and how Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi were monitored coming into the United States, coming out of the Kuala Lumpur summit.
Yeah.
And the CIA blocking that information from going to the FBI then.
Right.
And we played Richard Clarke's clip where he talks about that. So that, coming across your work on Dr. David Graham, then there's this source who's going right to the FBI and telling them he's met these two, he didn't know they were hijackers at the time, but it was an intermediary, wasn't it? I'll have to remind myself of his
Mohamed Jamal Khan.
Yeah.
He was a Saudi-born gentleman living in Pakistan who had a rap sheet for all kinds of petty crime, and but also was doing interesting things in Shreveport. If you look at his criminal background, he also seemed to be doing things to bring attention to himself. Like he jumped off a bridge at one point, and he seemed to be maybe setting up dates or sexual liaisons for different officers and women at Barksdale Air Force Base. He was a real sleazy dude, and he also was kind of like these terrorists' handlers. And Dr. David Graham was kind of an amateur detective who set up a hidden camera. There's videotapes. I don't know if you ever saw the documentary Court of Corruption by.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So you can see some of the footage that I brought back from Shreveport of Graham using his wiles and getting Mohamed Jamal Khan to come out of jail and speak to Graham in his doctor's office, not knowing there was a hidden camera. And so Jamal Khan confirmed that he had in fact introduced Dr. Graham to two of the 9/11 hijackers. Yeah.
This is when Khan was in prison after 9/11.
Yeah, Khan was in jail, not prison, but in jail on some sort of petty offense. I think it was, I forget what it was. It was a petty offense.
I think he was hiding cash transfers.
Yeah, that's right. It was a wire transfer. He transferred over $9,999, I think. Right. Yes. And then he later skipped his bail, or he fled the country. And he skipped an extradition hearing. And there's a very interesting reference to 9/11, and the attorney's notes said something about, like, we reserve the right to leave the option open to prosecute Khan for crimes related to 9/11.
That's
we
right.
Do not, yeah, we do. Yeah, they made direct reference to 9/11 as if they knew something. And my buddy Jordan Green, who I went down to Shreveport with to research this story, and he did his own report for Yes Weekly. He's a Columbia journalism grad, so he crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's, and he even talked to that attorney and said, what was the meaning of these strange notes in your filing? And she said something like, oh, well, after 9/11, everybody was paranoid about 9/11, and everybody wanted to like leave the option open. But that seemed to be disingenuous at best, because this guy Khan had a direct relationship to two of the 9/11 hijackers that was not examined in his extradition hearing. It didn't come up, that this guy was a babysitter for Fayed Banahamed, Nawaf al-Hazmi, and maybe Khalid al-Mihdhar. Khalid al-Mihdhar was a name that Graham saw on boxes. And Graham personally met Fayed Banahamed and Nawaf al-Hazmi.
It was interesting that Khan was acting sufficiently suspicious to have Graham go to the FBI about him. He seems to be in no way trying to keep his head down. He's talking about his connections with the Pakistani embassy and Osama bin Laden and his access to this Barksdale Air Force Base, whether he's trying to draw attention to himself or not. He doesn't feel like he's on some secret operation shouting hijackers and he's got to keep it quiet and hidden from the authorities.
Yeah, in some ways, I'm reminded of Oswald shooting at the wrong target, or the fake Oswald shooting at the wrong target and saying, "I'm Lee Harvey Oswald, and I want to kill Kennedy. I wish that target was Kennedy." And then later, people being like, "Yeah, I saw that guy. He was a nut, and he loved to shoot at Kennedy." So Mohammed Jamal Khan jumping off of a bridge at one point, which is one of the many little petty crimes that we found by doing the research. But I think, to answer your question more directly, I think in the context of the big wedding, people are humans are humans. They tend to be braggarts. So I think there's just some natural boasting that I think he was also certainly capable of.
When Dr. Graham went to the FBI, and he did so before 9/11, it's from what I got from your writing was they didn't dismiss him because they're getting so many of these reports in of so many different things, and there was nothing.
Yeah, especially in Shreveport, right? The Shreveport office of the FBI was not inundated with 9/11 hot potatoes, smoking guns.
But have I got this right that David Graham initially went prior to 9/11 to report these guys because that's right. That's suspicious, right? So.
He thought they were young, suspicious Arabs, and he had a radio show. He was kind of like a Oklahoma City truther before 9/11. So he was very interested in the truth about Oklahoma City. You see, he was a Bush voting Republican who was interested in the truth about the world, And don't forget, he also took on the local Air Force establishment for framing young airmen for narcotics. This guy had been killed under suspicious circumstances, and it was called the Mons case. So Graham was the kind of guy that just did not give a rat's ass about anything but the truth. And he was willing to take on the entire establishment in Shreveport, and he did that from his perch on this little AM radio show. So, and he knew a rotten story when he heard one, like the Oklahoma City bombing. I don't know if we have time for that, but it's very similar. Some of the same names come up. Controlled Demolition Incorporated doing the cleanup at Oklahoma City. The same company, was one of the companies involved in doing the cleanup at Ground Zero. And the fact that the Murrah building could not have been taken out by a fertilizer bomb and a Ryder truck. Especially the column that was way in the back of the left center of the building, that column could not have been damaged the way it was by just a fertilizer bomb. So Graham was keen on young Arabs who were talking about wanting a box truck. So that's you're right. So it was before 9/11 he originally contacted the FBI, and that was some of the context that I believe he had.
And you contacted the FBI yourself, or you in a meeting with the FBI about this, where you put it to them that Mohammed Jamal Khan you asked him if he was an informant.
Right. Yeah, it was towards the end of my brief dialogue with Special Agent Steve Hayes of the Shreveport FBI, which was an impromptu interview. I did it with my buddy Jordan Green, who was the journalist I was traveling with. And it was a gift from the Spirit of Truth in a lot of ways, because we just walked in there and he happened to be the one that was sent to the front desk to shoo us away. And he didn't know who we were, but his reaction, I went in thinking that he would have a, you know, how most people are, you know, they're able to be stoic, but he was not. He almost seemed to be kind of like falling apart at the seams. And I guess it's the difference between the TV FBI and real life people. You know, he's a real human being, and I think that he didn't join the FBI to participate in the murder of, you know, small town radio journalist, dentist, patriot, Bronze Star heroes from Vietnam. You know, Dr. Graham was I think an outstanding member of the Shreveport community. You know, he was active in the local church, and he was friends with Deacon John Milkovich, who later became State Senator John Milkovich, who's another guy you should really talk to about this case. Milkovich later gave the what do you call it, the eulogy at the funeral for David Graham, and you know, he indicated that the FBI was certainly involved. And so my interview with Steve Hayes was brief, but we got everything we needed really from it. You know, I don't know if you're religious or spiritual, but certain coincidences happen that just almost seem like they're just too good not to be coming from some sort of higher power,
sure,
right? Or mathematics of the universe, if you will, or just kind of like things clicked. And so the interview was only maybe about 5 or 10 minutes, but he confirmed that he was a human being that was, he kind of sputtered forth and sort of blurted out things, you know, like we asked him, why was the FBI telling doctors in the emergency room that, you know, not to try to save this guy, or that he was suicidal, or which is something that indeed happened. Graham's own son confirmed that happened. The anesthesiologist, I think, left the emergency room due to intimidation from the FBI. And Hayes's answer was like nonsensical. He couldn't come up with anything better than, do you know that Dr. Graham had to be reminded to shut the lights off in his office at night, or he had to have his assistant, you know, help him with those kinds of things. It's kind of like, you know, A does not lead to B. And I just remember physically, like, you know, the body language was like, I had this kind of like this tremor, you know, this kind of, it was a tremor. It was like somebody that was really blocked, really angry with themselves, angry with probably their bosses and their bosses' bosses and the entire system, you know. Being really interesting to see what ever became of him. You know, I haven't ever tried to do any follow-up, but I probably should. It's probably a good time. I'm sure he'd love to hear from me. Maybe I'll urge him to do Landmark Forum or something. But the special agent in charge, Mike Kinder, did leave the Shreveport FBI office shortly after all this. He either left or was transferred. So yeah, there's probably more I could say about the Steve Hayes interview, but my coffee house was burglarized the same day that I did that interview.
Right.
It's kind of an interesting coincidence. This might not be a coincidence, but I definitely felt like I was onto something, and I think other people probably agreed. And I came back from Shreveport, and I was like really on fire. I even reached out to the local police precinct in Brooklyn. I don't know why I did. I think I met this guy. I met the new precinct chief, and he actually wrote me a letter. I still have the letter, but it said like, these are major findings that you found in Shreveport, you know. And this guy was not your average New York City cop who was like, you know, following the gag order, but he said that, you know, you found something there, and that felt really good. I needed that from some sort of father figure.
Sure. Could I follow up on that, if I may? Are you familiar with Mike Sledge?
Mike Sledge? No, who is that?
He's a close friend to Dr. David Graham, and he's the one who's
Yeah.
He's actually holding the manuscript called the Graham Report.
Right. I have a copy of it still too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike Sledge. Yeah. That's right. I think he was one of the people that we met with.
Okay.
Yeah. That's right. We did meet with him. Yeah.
Is there any reason why that wasn't published at all, or?
Well, it is published on sanderhicks.com as a free download.
Right. Yeah.
But it's one of these books. It's kind of like Rodney Stitch's book. It's like great for researchers, but it's not really a work of literature. It's not going to sell more than 500 copies. And the economies of scale in publishing, especially before print on demand. But I used to be in publishing in the 90s, and you'd think about, do we really want to invest in printing a minimum of 1,000 copies of this book, and will it sell, and will it break even? So yeah, it's worth it. I just, unfortunately, guys, I hate to break it to you, but not that many people care. I wish more people cared. I wish more people cared about the time that the FBI killed a U.S. citizen who was a hero and a fearless spiritual warrior, truth teller. But I don't know. We're living in a very cynical time, and people are overworked. People don't have the time to do their own research and follow their passions. We like Thoreau said, I don't want to get to the end of my life and realize that I never lived, right? And unfortunately, people live lives of quiet desperation, and they don't ever really follow their passions, and they run around with anger and resentment and telling a story in their heads. And that's what leads to things like the FBI killing a whistleblower, and the local media, for the most part, didn't expose it. However, there was a really kick-ass, youngish TV journalist named Jeff Farrell who did cover it, and he always helped me get on television whenever I was down in Shreveport. So that was really great. I love him for that. So anyway.
Well, wouldn't this be a problem though? Because it's a very nondescript story itself. I mean, not many people outside of a few that I know of, and I only came across David Grant because of you. And yeah, there's not many people that know about the story. So I can't really blame the public for not knowing, because, as you said, the media really didn't give this any attention whatsoever.
Well, yeah, but you know what? The way the media works is a really good local story will get picked up for the national wire services or national news services, and this story has been on KSLA TV numerous times, but it pushes all the wrong buttons, because it points to U.S. military overseeing a couple of the key 19 hijackers, and I know we're not living in very spiritual, religious times, but I think one of the gods you cannot question in our day and age is the 9/11 official story, because then you're really going after a lot of big money power. And, it's almost like even more powerful than money is like belief and psychology and tropes and just kind of like the reality, the building blocks of reality, and I'm trying to wrestle with why more people in the DSA don't respond to, hey, what happened in the Straits of Hormuz is a false flag attack. Let's talk about this. I tried to have a Zoom conference with activists last night, and it didn't really get off the ground. But I did talk to a couple of people though, so that was good. But yeah.
Can I ask you, because I'd like to go on and talk about Mohamed Atta and particularly his time in Florida. That brings up lots of questions about who these people are, because we've been trying to dig into who Mohamed Atta is from Hamburg Sale onwards. But with this character, Mohammed Jamal Khan, before we do, he reads like a kind of a crook, right? He doesn't come across as someone who's expressing deep concern for the Palestinian cause or any sort of Islamic fanaticism the way Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman might, the 1993 bomber.
Right.
So I'm maybe asking you to speculate and say, just say if you don't wish to go there, but do you get a sense of what his relationship to Nawaf al-Hamzi and Khalid al-Madidhar was then, or what is in their mindset if they've got connections to the Saudi GID that causes them to hijack a plane to the point of their own deaths? Because it's easy to see that if it's explicable through either a religious fanaticism or some sort of devotion to a cause like the liberation of the people of Palestine, or we're doing it because of the sanctions in Iraq or something. But if it's a more sinister ploy, if it's more of a criminal element, what do you have any insight into that? I appreciate that's an impossible question in many regards, so I'm just...
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you personally, my experience of Islam is one of it's a high level of dedication, and the way you conceive of God is God as the fountain of all mercy, all compassion, the most merciful, the most compassionate, and so I think my experience of Islam is it's highly it contradicts having anything to do with U.S. military or Saudi intelligence or Al-Qaeda, whatever that is. And so I don't think that these guys were religiously motivated. Of course, Wahhabism inside of Saudi Arabia is extremely strict, and is not considered, true Islam. I guess my biases are more probably, having had some experiences with Shia Islam in Iran, but I don't know enough about them personally to explain their personal motives, but I think the best we can do is that they were dupes, they were cutouts, they were compartmentalized. They probably didn't know about the whole operation. We know Mohamed Atta spoke Hebrew, according to his pink-haired stripper girlfriend Amanda Keller, who's an American. He had a brief fling with her, but that was an interesting relationship for the insights it gave us into Mohamed Atta and Wolfgang Bohringer, who I hope we get to talk about.
Yeah, maybe can I ask you about that now then? A man...
Twist my arm.
I was about to call him Amanda Atta. I was going to conflate the two, right? So we've actually, the last recording Adam and I did was on the Hamburg cell, and we were looking particularly at Mohamed Atta and Ziad Jarrah. So let's focus on Mohamed Atta. He comes to Hamburg through a connection of a couple of German teachers, and then he seems to spend an incredibly long amount of time doing this educational course. It's not clear, but people seem to suspect that the CIA are monitoring the Hamburg cell. At some point, his associate, Ramzi bin al-Shabib, goes off to this summit in Kuala Lumpur. So presumably after that, the CIA are monitoring the Hamburg cell when he comes back. And then there's no problem. Ramzi bin al-Shabib does not get into the United States, but not because he's on a terrorist watch list, much like Khalid al-Madidhar or Nawaf al-Hamzi. Mohamed Atta does. And then we have these completely conflicting reports of him, where he's certainly acting the fundamentalist to some degree when he's in Germany, but we have this completely conflicting report with Amanda Keller and his stripper girlfriend. And this has been a very difficult thing, I think, to get to the bottom of for me. I wrote a list of reasons for and against Amanda Keller even having met Mohamed Atta, because people dispute that. She made a statement, she retracted it, she made it again. She might have been describing somebody else called Mohammed. So there's factors that seem to go against it, and then there's factors for it, like there's clearly the FBI were trying to intimidate her, and there's multiple witnesses to that fact. I think it's her mother, her landlord, and Mohamed Atta's landlord all say that she met Mohamed Atta. So I got a list of for and against, and I don't know if you want to add anything there, Adam, but that's as far as I got with it. And I end up throwing my hands up and say, gee, I don't know, because she places Mohamed Atta as being a psychopathic guy who tortured kittens and liked to snort a lot of cocaine, and may have been involved in the importation of cocaine, which takes him to that would really explain a lot if he was some sort of intelligence asset working for the CIA or whatever. And then there's this Wolfgang Bohringer connection that you've talked about, which I will just hand over to you to talk about. I don't have my head around that at all. So
good.
Adam,
Well, I know you like to read. So
before?
have you read Daniel Hopsicker's work?
Yes.
Yeah, Adam has. I haven't read it.
Okay, great. Well, there's a fun book by this guy Daniel Hopsicker called "Welcome to Terrorland: Mohamed Atta and the 9/11 Flying Circus in Florida." And I guess it kind of came and went. It's great that you saw it, Adam, or read it, and
it's only about $200. That's why I haven't read it.
No, shoot! Wow,
yeah,
that's
it's really
funny.
hard to get.
Oh, that's funny. Wow.
Yeah, it costs a lot of money. It's ridiculous.
Wow. Yeah. That's too bad. I'm going to have to make sure I have my old copy somewhere. I think I do. But I think I have a signed copy from Daniel, because Daniel was kind of a friend, and he was somebody I knew before 9/11, because I was the publisher of a Bush book called Fortunate Son, and Hopsicker came out of the woodwork and wanted me to work with him on something. He wanted me to work on him on this Barry Seal book, and I didn't really get it, so I didn't. But then he published his own Barry Seal book, Barry and the Boys, right around the time of 9/11, and then was primed to self-publish his work on Mohamed Atta, because he is, I really respect him because he does his own research, and he gets in a car, and in his case, he moved to Florida and lived there for like 10 years and did a lot of research. So, yeah, and I know that the FBI's timeline is wrong in terms of when Atta came to Florida. I remember that from Hopsicker saying it was one of the primary things that he was concerned with. And I also think, like, you got to remember, like, they can, if they need to have two Mohamed Attas, they could easily find somebody that looks a lot like them and acts like them, or acts even more like the original, like Oswald. We need an Oswald that looks like Lee Harvey Oswald, but is even more pissed off, is less leftist and more anti-Kennedy, and and he'll do this and that, and people will really remember because he'll say, "I'm Mohamed Atta," or "I'm Lee Harvey Oswald." Right? So the movie Executive Decision depicts that really well. The 1972 film with Burt Lancaster, the JFK film. Yeah. So, and I think, Richard, your questions are answered when you just look at the issue of Wolfgang Bohringer, because this was clearly the deep state stepping in and trumping the actions of the Joint Terrorism Task Force. When they arrested Mohamed Atta's CIA-linked drinking buddy, cocaine buddy, Key West party boy, Wolfgang Bohringer, who hated the Jews and had like 100,000 in cash on his yacht, and I think he slept with a loaded Glock. And this guy had all kinds of connections. Anyway, some sort of international deep state figure like him, when Joint Terrorism Task Force arrests him, he says, "You can't arrest me. I'm working for the CIA, according to my sources." And then my sources say, "Oh, and this is all off the record, and please don't ever publish this. And if you do, our relationship is over." And then, me being the punk rock publisher dude, I just can't get enough of that. And of course, I'm not going to not do the story. So I did the story. And at the same time, Daniel Hopsicker did the story. So we both had pretty much the same story from some very similar sources. I was lucky again to have one of the sources actually visiting my coffee house at the time. We were doing a book party for Joe Trento, and there was an NYPD intelligence guy, Wally Zines, who was telling the source, Lois Ann Batuello, stuff, and because Lois was the one that had faxed pages of Welcome to Terrorland, Hopsicker's book, to the Joint Terrorism Task Force. She's this weird, connected woman. She's not weird, but she has weird connections. She's actually a very nice lady, but she also suddenly decided to kind of try to put the kibosh on both me and Hopsicker and said, "Don't, this is." She basically said it. She did an about face and said, "You're not seeing what you're seeing, and you can't report or write on what you're seeing here. And we both were like, fuck you. This is huge. This is, if somebody says you can't arrest me, I'm working for the CIA, that's pretty hot. And then he's released, Richard. It's not that he said that, but he later was released. And so that, I think, is a smoking gun. And that also, it's kind of similar to the David Graham story, didn't get half the attention it deserved.
So just to walk me through the narrative, it's Amanda Keller that places Atta with Wolfgang Bohringer. She's the one that talks about this.
That's right. Yeah, that he and Bohringer partied with Atta numerous times in Key West. And that's how Hopsiker found out about him. And so basically Hopsiker, hearing it from Amanda, put it in his book. Lois worked with Hopsiker and was trying to kind of coach him a little bit. And she taught him a few things about pulling documents and legal documents and court records and stuff. And so Lois seems to have a foot in each camp and is close to the National Association of Securities Dealers, NASDAQ. Was part of a blue ribbon panel for the SEC at one point. She's located in the Napa Valley, California, from what I hear. But ever since this story, she hasn't talked to me. We've been out of touch. There's a great picture of me sitting with her and Joe Trento and Susan Trento at my old coffee house. But so I can tell you that this happened. But and I can show you a photograph, kind of like the cover of Barry and the Boys with Daniel Hopsiker, where you can see all these CIA people drinking with Barry Seal.
Adam, do you have any follow-up to that or anything else?
Actually, I do. In chapter 3 of the book, The Big Wedding, Hopsiker, in his investigation into Huffman Aviation, where some of the 9/11 hijackers like Atta and Marwan al-Shehhi chose to be pilots when he took flight training, it has past ties to the CIA. The company was owned by Rudy Deckers and had an affiliate with Wally Hilliard, who gave him $100,000 to start the business. Can you explain how these two and the history of aviation ties into the CIA?
Yeah, so there's a guy I made reference to earlier when I confused part of his history with Richard House's history, but his name is Captain Brad Ayers, and he knows a lot about Florida. He's a former DEA agent and was tasked to work for a kind of a CIA training ground that was going to train people to take Cuba over. And it was a rare CIA domestic training ground called JM Wave. So Brad Ayers told me a lot about the background of CIA in Florida, and especially on the western coast of Florida. So Huffman Aviation was located at a former military airstrip in western Florida and southwestern Florida. And it was actually Lois Ann Battuello, who I just mentioned earlier, who taught Daniel or coached Daniel to find all these corporate records that was able to link Wally Hilliard and Rudy Deckers, and Arnie Krutoff was the other Dutch guy. And so Hopsiker thought it was odd that both two of the flight training centers that these 19 hijackers supposedly trained at were owned by Dutch nationals. And I talked to Rudy Deckers too on the phone at one point, and tried to interview him. It was okay. It wasn't that great an interview, but for what it's worth.
Would you consider Rudy Deckers to be a nefarious figure regarding all this?
I think Wally Hilliard is probably more interesting because, there's other business associates that he had that I think are interesting, and there's banking and CIA possible connections. It gets pretty Byzantine, and so it's not a smoking gun from what I remember, but it's worth looking into. Somebody like Rudy Deckers, I think, is kind of almost like a cutout or what do you call it? Like a fall guy, or a backstop. Somebody who's compartmentalized. He only knows a little bit, and yeah. So Rudy Deckers didn't strike me as very intelligent. Not the sharpest tool in the shed.
I would agree with that, because I always thought the same way as you did. Hilliard, in the book, your book, The Big Wedding, it actually gives him $100,000 out of the blue, and he says that do what you want with it. And actually, Deckers didn't even believe it, so he actually went and cashed a check and put it to his pilot. But meanwhile, there's a guy, Wally Hilliard, says, I make that in a day, and this guy has, he's a millionaire many times over, and after 9/11, actually Hilliard states to Deckers that he wants 51% of the proceeds for the company. Deckers disagrees, but Hilliard ends up taking the company, and actually the company, I think, is liquidated years later. I'm not too sure if it's open anymore, but interesting figure enough, because Hilliard's not a very popular figure, but he's a very shadowy figure at best.
Yeah. There's a funny quotation that Hopsicker found about something like, I think Hilliard said, "You really got to ride herd on those pilots or else they'll skin you." Sounds like a grandfatherly, salty thing to say. Yeah. Oh yeah. What is it? His personal motto was, love God, hate communism, back the pack.
Back the pack.
Back the pack. Yeah. Basically, back the group, back the team, back the pack.
Oh, okay. Right. Richard?
Okay, yeah, anything further on Florida? I'd like to, there's a couple more things, like sort of areas I'd like to ask about Randy Glass, for sure. And I think it ties in to...
There's the other side of Florida, yeah.
Right. Well, it sort of ties into Mohammed Jamal Khan having this, or announcing he has this connection to the Pakistani embassy, and then Randy Glass uncovering this Pakistani ISI connection. Can you maybe talk about who Randy Glass is, how you met him, and his relevance here? What you uncovered about the State Department's foreknowledge of 9/11?
Right. This is something, again, people in the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, which I hope you guys will also interview those people sometime. They're actually, I think at the point of the spear in terms of legal action with all this stuff, and trying to make it not just be research, but action, and action towards justice. So a lawyer from the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry was recently asking me about Randy Glass and his possible connection or likely connection to a State Department official, kind of an undersecretary at the time of 9/11, named Francis X. Taylor, who Randy Glass wouldn't name by name, but inferred that I had it right. He dropped all the breadcrumbs to lead me to this guy, Francis X. Taylor, so Randy Glass was a former con man who became an informant for the Joint Terrorism Task Force, Operation Diamondback, which was infiltrating Pakistani and Taliban-linked international arms dealers to try to prevent Pakistan from getting a nuclear weapon, and so Glass had his eyes open and his ears open, and he heard at one point that there was that the Twin Towers would be taken down. He heard it from one of his contacts. He was undercover, working for Joint Terrorism Task Force, and so he kind of went and tried to alert the authorities more. He felt that he was being silenced, and so he wrote a memo, sent it to Senator Bob Graham of Florida. It's one of the memos that's on the inside back cover of The Big Wedding, in which he refers to, in his letter to Senator Bob Graham, he refers to his contacts at State Department. And some of those contacts were likely Francis X. Taylor, who Glass told me said to Glass that, don't worry about it. We have it under control. We know all about planes being flown into the World Trade Center. So that was Francis X. Taylor. So if you jump back to the topic half an hour ago about the dancing Israelis admitting that they had foreknowledge, and all the other people that seem to, I think there's 19 different international intelligence agencies of other countries that were warning the U.S. about 9/11, 2001, right? And there's so many different code words, like the big wedding is happening on the 11th, right?
Yeah.
Right. So there's all kinds of different indications that there was serious foreknowledge, but I don't think anybody has ever. I don't think anybody has ever implicated somebody as high up in the State Department as what Randy Glass did, and he later had his day in court in Congress, and he said that you in Congress should be here to stand for the truth, not to stand over the truth, not to cover up the truth. And that's what his experience was. He's somebody I haven't kept in touch with, but I recently found out that we think he's deceased. But there's an ATF agent that I think one of us three should follow up with. I think his name is Steve Barberini. I think I emailed you some of that lead info. Yeah. People that Glass worked with said he was a good guy and that he had good character, and he just had a criminal past, so it's easy to dismiss some of his testimony. But he also was interviewed by Dateline NBC, and the foreknowledge that the towers were going to be taken out was relevant, to say the least.
Right. I think one of the contacts with Randy Glass was an arms dealer named H.G. Abbas. I think that was his name.
R.G. Abbas.
R.G. Abbas. Okay, thank you.
Right. Yeah, he was posing with Stinger anti-aircraft missiles on his shoulder. Right. I think it was R.G. Abbas who said those towers are coming down. They had dinner at Robert De Niro's Tribeca Grill.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah,
I was struck by the State Department said back to him that President Musharraf of Pakistan knows about it, and he said that it's under control because ultimately it's an ISI, Pakistani intelligence operation, so they'll make sure it doesn't happen. Right. Now, whether that was a sort of limited hangout line to give to Randy Glass, or whether the State Department genuinely believed the ISI were going to prevent 9/11,
or the State Department was planning to expose a $100,000 wire transfer from the head of the ISI to Mohamed Atta right around 9/11 in case things got too hairy, and in case anybody in the corporate media started asking questions, they could have thrown Pakistan under the bus as a possible stopgap measure to have contingency plans in place, right? Any professional operation has to have contingency plans.
Yeah.
So
if
somebody
£1,000 or $100,000 wire transfer, I remember hearing about that quite early on.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
It was probably a red herring to get people interested in looking at Pakistan when really we should have been looking at the U.S. Saudi-Israeli deep state.
Right.
The Lieutenant General was Mahmoud Ahmed.
Yeah.
Right. He was the head of ISI.
He was in the United States on September 11th.
He was meeting with Senator Bob Graham that day. In fact, Senator Graham's book, Intelligence Matters, which is highly recommended, talks about that. Yeah. And
I have always wondered, there might be a simple answer to this, but it was like the day before, wasn't it? The $100,000 transfer came in, and I always wondered what Mohamed Atta was going to do with $100,000 in one day. I know there's 19 hijackers and others involved, so you divide it up, but does he even have time to divide it up? So it implies that the head of the ISI was not aware the operation was going down tomorrow, or that Mohamed Atta had plans beyond September 11th, or I don't know. Is there a simple answer to that? What if you can give me? It just seemed a strange thing that late on.
Yeah, not everything is what it seems. You don't know if you don't know if. I mean, it's likely that they're all dead. All 19 hijackers were killed, either in the planes or by other means, right?
Yeah, I find it exceptionally likely. We were just discussing this, that we, the plebs, haven't seen the flight manifest, but the 9/11 Commission did. And it's unlikely that none of them would have looked up and down and gone, hang on a minute, the Mohamed Atta's not on here, right? It does appear that the flight listings would have contained their names, and therefore they were on the planes, right? So I do find it compelling that they were. I can't say for sure they all were, but I find it compelling.
Well, if you trust the 9/11 Commission.
Every commissioner to either not check that or to not actually look for the names, or they would all keep that under wraps. I don't know. Maybe they would. Or
well, the commission was highly controlled.
Yeah.
I remember Catherine Austin Fitz saying every single member of this commission has a control file. There's something on them that it's on file that the deep state has to control them. You know, especially people like Richard Benveniste, the Barry Seals lawyer, right? Friends of the Clintons, friends of what Hofstadter called the Dixie Mafia, and anyway, what I was going to tell you is that, like, I don't know how Atta spent the $100,000, but I think it's interesting that was exposed and it wasn't followed up on. You know, all of this, the whole topic kind of shows that something's really wrong with the state of journalism in America.
Yeah. Actually, with Atta, he actually sent back $15,000 to the United Arab Emirates the night before.
But, oh, he did?
Yeah, he did. He actually sent back some money. But that wasn't, I mean, that money wasn't just the only thing. I mean, you touched on it earlier about Haifa bin Faisal sending increments of like $9,000, $8,000 to the wives of two Saudi nationals that were affiliated with Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf Abzi, and they were Omar al-Bayoumi and Osama Basnan. And these people were getting money from the U.S. ambassador to the United States. And
Prince Bandar.
Yeah, Prince Bandar bin Sultan, sure.
Bandar Bush.
Yeah, Bandar Bush, long-standing friend to the Bush family, and as well as to Bush Sr. and Ronald Reagan as well. But there was funding coming from all over the place, and you wonder where. Like, I think Bob Graham actually said it in the Joint House Inquiry. He states that the disparity between the damage that they've done and to how much we had to spend compared to how much they needed was somewhere they probably speculated somewhere between $300,000 to $400,000 for the operation, but it cost the United States upwards like 50, 60 billion. And he said that the cost effect was really damaging. Bin Laden, in his interview with Taysir Lawani of Al Jazeera, states that was exactly one of the reasons why he wanted the attacks to happen, was because it wasn't basically about religious reasons whatsoever. We can all agree on this. It was basically about bleeding dry economic in the United States and drawing into a war with Afghanistan. And that's exactly what he wanted. But he doesn't say anything about Iraq, because Iraq, I don't think, was anything about really 9/11. It was a lie based upon Anthrax letters that Mohamed Atta went to Prague and basically got Anthrax, but that was false. That was through, I think, Laurie Malroy, who spread that rumor, and it turned out to be false.
Yeah.
But
or something, yeah.
Right. And what I'm saying is that we don't know the concept of how many people were actually funding this. But you could say that a lot of this money that was coming from corporations outside the United States, which was Pakistan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia itself, and plus also to within inwards the United States as well.
Have you guys looked at Anthrax? Well, since you mentioned Anthrax, it's worth noting that to me is a huge untapped. You want to talk about stuff like that people should talk about more. Anthrax, less about the Pentagon, more about Anthrax. It could that microfine anthrax could have only come from either Dugway Proving Ground or Battelle Memorial Institute. So, two these quasi-governmental agencies, and and Bruce Evans could not have done it. Bruce Evans could have not, acting alone. So,
and something we never hear about now. I mean, if it had gone the other way, that could be a really big terrorist motif. And I remember I just left school and was doing a summer job in a bank at the time, and we were given rubber gloves to open the mail with, just in case Osama bin Laden in league with Saddam Hussein and the devil in tow sending anthrax letters to this tiny little bank on an island in Europe, you know. It's just, I mean, it was crazy, you know. It was that's the level of paranoia. The anthrax attacks spread so quickly, and then it was completely forgotten as soon as the narrative about it being connected with Iraq fell apart.
Remember, there was a frenzy for duct tape. Everybody wanted duct tape, and they couldn't buy enough duct tape. Everyone was duct taping windows and stuff. Yeah.
Well, why do you think that story died on the vine? The anthrax letters, anyway.
Oh. It's almost like, just remember how that story almost made us all emotional as a country, as a world, speaking of a small, tiny island in Europe. It's almost like that was like the thing that really heightened the terror of 9/11 and brought it home to everybody, because it was a terrifically terrible event on television, but the anthrax component meant that you could also personally be killed or poisoned through this, you know, a very deadly bio warfare chemical. Pardon me. So, and then it went poof, you know, and then the whole story just disappeared. So it's almost like an emotional climax in which we were all really upset, and then it left, and the story got kind of lumped together with all the many mysteries of 9/11 that people don't really have the time for, or they just feel pressure not to look into it.
Because those the letters actually went to the two Democratic senators that were against the war. I think
Tom Daschle
and
John Kerry.
Was it? I think it was Leahy.
Patrick Leahy.
Patrick
That's
Leahy.
right.
Yeah,
You're
Patrick
right.
Leahy.
Patrick Leahy.
Patrick Leahy. Yeah. Incidentally enough, but
were they dragging their heels on the Patriot Act? There was, I don't understand the American political structure well enough, but they were in some way involved in signing off on the Patriot Act and dragging their heels on it.
Actually, I think it was actually regarding to the 9/11 Commission. They wanted to open up the commission as well. Right. They wanted an investigation, and the letters went to him, and I think it went to Dan Rather as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
And National Enquirer,
right.
And American Media Group.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then that story just like disappeared off thin air because the war came, and everybody concentrated on the war. But I agree with you, Sander, in regard to like, I never could understand the fascination for no plane hitting the Pentagon, as if like a hijacked plane can't. If you want to say the planes were remote controlled, that's fine. I don't know anything about aviation or mechanics and with it, but here's a real link into like State Department malfeasance and complicity involving these invasions of Iraq. And because it was the anthrax letters themselves, and this is hardly ever discussed. I agree with you. It's something that should be discussed in further in 9/11 circles, and regretfully it's not, because I've never seen it.
Yeah. Well, do you know Barry Kissin? You know who that is? Barry Kissin has done some great work.
I've heard of his name. I'm not too sure.
Yeah. He's actually based in Frederick, Maryland, which is pretty near the Fort Detrick anthrax bioterror headquarters of America. So, and he's a friend of mine, and an attorney and a saxophone player and a great guy. So, and I quoted from his work on anthrax liberally in my book, Slingshot to the Juggernaut.
And it seemed that because of this now, we are now forced into almost another conflict in the Middle East itself. Something that the one I'm forgetting his name, the general that went to a Democracy Now! And stated the
Wesley Clark.
Right, thank you, Wesley Clark. And do you see the war looming anytime future? Would it be this year or next year? Would it save Trump's presidency, actually?
Yeah, I think it actually will accelerate Trump's decline, because it's so clearly, I think he's clearly on the verge of impeachment. I think Pelosi is even thinking about it now. from last of what I heard. I think people would see through it. I think it would be a desperate measure. Iran is 4 times the size of Iraq, population-wise, actually maybe it's 4 times. I should check this before I say what it is. It might be 4 times the size of Iraq geographically and 10 times the size population-wise, but it dwarfs Iraq, and we're talking about a 5,000-year-old civilization. Yeah. They've had government by Islam for centuries before they had the Shah, who was installed by U.S. Imperialism. So they had Time Magazine of the Year Mossadegh, who was assassinated in the very first CIA coup in 1953. So we owe them an apology, not a unprovoked attack. And I've been there twice for conferences about Palestine and about a new horizon of international dialogue. And I don't agree politically with everybody that was there, but there's a lot of good that was there too. That's where I heard actually Kevin Barrett tell me to read this book called From Yahweh to Zion, which gave me some perspective on Jack Ruby, and who was Jacob Rubinstein and his connections to Israel and the possible Israeli involvement in the JFK killing, which is an interesting topic to look into. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's interesting. Let's say that.
Sure, yeah. No, I find it's an angle I wasn't aware of until seeing Ryan Dawson's documentary, where he mentions the same thing.
Oh, good. Is he an anti-Semite?
Now that you laugh about it, he just recently got labeled an anti-Semite. He had to go on a radio show called The Chuckacelli Effect and defend his position. And I know Dawson for quite some time, and he did a documentary called War by Deception and talked about the dancing Israelis himself. And
well, there's some Zionists. Let's define our term. There's some Zionists who, if you do anything that's critical of Israel, then you are an anti-Semite.
Yeah,
so it depends on how you define the term.
That's what I hear when I hear the term anti-Semite. The first neuron that fires in my brain is that this is someone who's trying to defend the state of Israel by leveling the anti-Semite connection. Maybe it's a bigger thing in the UK because the Labour Party of Jeremy Corbyn is continuously being labelled as being anti-Semitic, or people are anti-Zionists. Anti-Zionism explained is people who don't even think the Jews have a right to a homeland, and if you don't know anything about the context, it's more, my goodness, I mean, everyone's got a right to some sort of homeland, don't they? That's just, they want, the anti-Zionists want to drive the Jews into the sea. So that, maybe I'm a little bit biased against seeing it. Well, what I kind of see in truther groups is, I'm interested that you both think there's a lot of anti-Semitism. I think what I see a lot of is people maybe find it easier to have a kind of monopolar worldview, that there's one thing behind everything, and whether it's the Illuminati or the CIA or Zionism, and for a lot of people it is Zionism. So, if you stub your toe, it's Zionists almost. And I think that there's a tendency to, you've got your hammer and that's your one tool, so every problem is now a nail, or every false flag attack is a Zionist behind it. And there may be kind of a simplicity in the worldview that way. But that's my kind of bias, I suppose, on it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I see. Yeah. What was I going to say? There's a thread I was going to pick back up. It's a joke, but there should be some comedian should develop some sort of line of humor in which you can say, like, look at what happened to Representative Ilhan Omar in the U.S. How dare she suggest that people are sensitive about AIPAC, or how dare she should suggest people are still sensitive about 9/11. We're not sensitive about AIPAC, and we're not sensitive about 9/11. And how dare she? Because it's a self-proving thesis. How people get so insane if you suggest that AIPAC is powerful. Oh my God, what are you saying? I'm just saying AIPAC is powerful. How dare you? Well, and then like suddenly bad things happen to you. Or people are saying your political career is over just because you stated the obvious. It's not fair.
Yeah, I think I agree with your earlier point too, and I've noticed it right away that actual proponents who have an actual legitimate beef with Israeli right-wing politics, the Likud party in the Knesset, and how that influences our bipartisan Congress. These people are automatically thrown into the pot of the fringe anti-Jewish people. People like, for me, it's Bolin. Like Bolin, I think poisoned the waters itself for people who have legitimate critics of Israeli politics itself. And I'm in that group because I do criticize Israeli politics almost not every day, but like once a week I'll put up a story. But it's not enough for some of these people. They want to blame Israel for everything, like you said before. They'll blame everything under the sun, which are discussed with Bolin. He gives you little bits of nuggets that are actually true within 9/11 itself, but then he poisons all of that by implicating that they're involved with the JFK assassination, the World War II, and every event in human history. I don't want to say that he's doing this on purpose for a more nefarious purpose, but I don't know why he does it, because he's not a stupid man. And it makes me wonder about the agendas of certain people and why they do this. And what would be your opinion on that?
Oh, I don't know. I can't really. That's a rabbit hole. He has a complex history. He lived on a kibbutz. Something bad happened to him. Maybe he got his heart broken. I don't know. But yeah, in person, he struck me as cold. He struck me as like somebody who was almost like, this cold, slow energy of just like, and it wasn't lively. And yeah, and when I was running for Congress, I thought maybe I should learn to be more of a diplomat and patch up bridges, because a lot of people, I was trying to get a lot of support from the 9/11 truth community, which is like herding cats, right? And so a lot of people were like, "Oh, you're that guy that attacked Christopher Bolin," and so a lot of people knew me only as this anti-Bolin guy. Yeah, and so I thought I would reach out and patch things up and be a this is sort of like a dance with the devil, and I'm not totally proud of this story, but I thought I would be, show that I could moderate my extreme views, and I would reach out and make peace with this guy. But he didn't want to have anything to do with me, or didn't want to have anything to do with, I don't know, maybe maybe he doesn't like people asking him questions about it.
I found this a very disappointing aspect of the truth movement. I think a lot of it is explainable through ego. That people, you can listen to someone's podcast, you can read their book, and you can think that they're all about getting the truth out of the information, and then you have some personal contact with them and find that they're bringing all their psychological baggage into it too. And I encounter that a lot. And the ideological splits as well, like, for all the information Adam has put out on 9/11, either on my podcast or on his own show, for a lot of people, that the only concern is his opinion on the Pentagon, right? If a plane hit it or not. That's the only thing. Right? Anything about Alex Station or the deep history of US collusion with radicalism, nothing. Did a plane hit the Pentagon? That's it. And,
right.
I find that.
Are you right or wrong? Are you right?
Even
or
if you're
wrong?
Right.
That's the thing. People are upset.
And I do wonder.
Hold
about
on a second. Wait.
It's a known thing that the Israeli state employs students to sit and counter anti-Israeli narratives online, okay? And you can see that being, from their perspective at least, quite justifiable. People are saying bad things about Israel, so I'm going to correct them. And, earn a few quid for doing it, and that's fine. But if you really wanted to disrupt criticism of any state, or if you wanted to disrupt something like a truth movement, the most effective way to do it would not be to sit at your keyboard going, hey, you're wrong about that. Israel's a really good country, or the CIA is a good organization, or 9/11 wasn't an inside job. The best way to do it would be to interject and go over the top, to take on the narrative and say, yeah, that's right, drive the Jews into the sea. Or yeah, the towers were holograms and no one died on 9/11, you know? To interject, like, ridiculous narratives is far more destructive. Now, whether there are people who are consciously doing that because they're on a payroll, or whether that's just human psychology playing out, it has a very destructive effect on...
Well, again, no, this is actually historically measurable, that there is a thing called bad jacketing, and that's the kind of COINTELPRO tactics that we know have existed in American history. That the Black Panthers were infiltrated by somebody who is extreme and is like really wants to, you know, engage in violent activities. And this person was also sowing seeds of dissension by saying, I think XYZ is an agent, or I think ABC is an agent, when really they're the one that is the agent. So that's called bad jacketing or snitch jacketing. And that's what breaks apart activist organizations.
Yeah, I think that's because I mean, I have no idea. And I think it's destructive to speculate on individuals more often than it's not, and who's doing what. But whether it's being intentionally done or not, it's a massive thing that goes on.
But you know, Richard, one of the things you learn in bad jacketing is that the person who's suggesting somebody's an agent is usually the person who is the agent. So that's why it's tricky. It's tricky because you don't want to be the one. You don't want to be the one. You know, it's kind of like, yeah.
I think there's a funny irony in that, Richard. I think we're both thinking of the one person.
Well, I can think of two or three, but yeah.
Right. It's huge. It's funny.
Yeah. But anyway, my phone's at 10%, and I tried to plug in the charger, but that means I unplugged the headphones, and then I couldn't hear you. So we, how much longer do you guys want to go?
Well, no, this has been fantastic. I would love to squeeze in, if it's only 2 minutes, a question on 1993 and Carson Dunbar. If 10% will get us there, then
yeah,
you're
probably. I probably only have about 2% of my energy left, but
we can do it another time. I mean, doing 6 months.
No, it's okay. In the name of the late great Mike Rupert, I will go on for another 2%. So Mike Rupert was a former LAPD narcotics detective who then became somebody who confronted the CIA Director Alan Deutsch about CIA-linked narcotics trafficking, as depicted in the work of Gary Webb, who's, you know, the great movie I watched last New Year's, the fictionalized version of the Gary Webb story. Gary Webb was kind of a friend of mine. I corresponded with him right before I spoke at the very first 9/11 Truth Conference in San Francisco in, I think, 2003. And I was speaking about CIA narcotics trafficking. And anyway, so Mike Rupert is somebody also was interested in this field and wrote his book about all of that, peak oil, 9/11 truth, and narcotics trafficking, his book Crossing the Rubicon. And at one point, before he published that book, he tipped me off to an FBI whistleblower that was a New York story that I should learn more about. And I have, and I've visited this guy in jail. His name is Richard Taus. And he has a lot of things to say about the world as we know it. And because of that, I got interested in his take on Iran-Contra, his take on FBI corruption. So where do you want to go with this? There's so many different directions.
What caught my eye is we did about 3 videos really around the 1993 bombing, the lead up to it, the bombing itself, and the landmarks plot afterwards. And I could write a whole list of things that you look at and go, yeah, that doesn't really make sense. I don't think we've gotten to the bottom of that bit or that bit, like Mohamed Salama going back to the rental car agency afterwards and all this stuff. But one of them is the actions of Carson Dunbar.
Hello everyone, just a quick audio interjection from myself because I made a couple of mistakes in the next 2 minutes, okay? So the first one being, I've just mentioned Carson Dunbar, but I didn't tell you who he was. He's the head of the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force when the 1993 bombing happened. And in a moment, you're going to hear me say he was later given the job as head of New Jersey State Troopers by Christina Hoff Sommers, and that's complete nonsense. I meant to say Christine Todd Whitman. Christina Hoff Sommers is an economist at the American Enterprise Institute. It's nothing to do with this at all. Christine Todd Whitman went on to work for the EPA and was the lady who said the air was safe to breathe after the towers came down, after 9/11, when it clearly wasn't. So I'll link to both of them so you can see the difference. But it was very late where I was. I'm several hours in front of both Sander and Adam, so it was early in the morning by the time we got to this point. So, okay, apologies for that. Back to the recording.
Okay, because you have Ahmed Salem coming in, the Egyptian mole in the Brooklyn terrorist cell, and saying, these guys, they're building a bomb, it's going to go off, they're going to take out something in New York. And Carson Dunbar, to cut a not very long story, very short, just pulls him out, and also prevents his agents, Antasaf and Napoli, monitoring Mohamed Salame and Mohamed the Red. So effectively, Carson Dunbar is a key part of the plot. From where I'm looking at it, the Peter Lance, author of 1,000 Years of Revenge, met Carson Dunbar, said he was quite blasé about it, didn't seem to think he's never seemed to think he'd done much wrong, didn't do his career any harm. He was on the TW800 investigation, and was Christine Hoff Sommers put him in charge of the New Jersey police then, who Christine Hoff Sommers is 9/11 famous as well. So because
New Jersey state troopers.
Yeah, because
that's an important distinction in our country.
Sorry. Because the cell is the Brooklyn cell, and the blind Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman was brought into the country by the CIA and seems to have been protected by them there. It would be reasonable to assume that they didn't just bring him in, they continued to protect him for whatever reason. Then I'm left to wonder, is this incompetence on Carson Dunbar's part, or does he have a deeper connection? And I didn't see how to approach that until I read in your book that, yeah, he was involved in some way in the cover-up of Iran-Contra. So that was really my specific interest.
Right. Yeah, so Richard Taus also exposed Oliver North early on and then wouldn't go the other way. And I think people like Carson Dunbar were trying to push Taus to go along, to get along, to look the other way, and Taus wouldn't do it. Very similar to David Graham, who got this, lots of language or lots of signs, sometimes a bullet through the window as a great metaphor for what might happen, and people like that are just heroic because they don't go the other way. They don't cave to the pressure, and they stand up and they have integrity. So Carson Dunbar has no integrity, and presided over the railroading 33 to 90 years for pedophilia charges that on the flimsiest of evidence for his underling, Richard Taus, who was a special agent of the FBI who wouldn't go the other way on Iran-Contra. So so there you have it. I urge you to go visit Richard Taus in Clinton Correctional, Dannemora Prison, Dannemora, New York.
Okay, everyone, with thanks to Sander, that's everything for this time. Any questions or comments on today's content we will happily receive, and perhaps we can delve more deeply into any aspect of it in the future. Thank you.